감히 어디서?
당신이 뭔데?
The stage was set as if for a grand spectacle. Cameras positioned at every angle, lights focused, the audience in absolute silence, and the sound of open microphones awaiting the first word. It was supposed to be a prestigious interview, a statement that would strengthen his public image, where he, confident and prepared, would reveal to the entire country a supposed truth about his marriage, believing that by exposing the woman he once called his wife, he would come off as a victim and gain even greater popular support. He hadn't expected to be confronted, not then, not live, not in front of millions of viewers. When she entered the studio, dressed in white, holding a folder filled with sealed documents, her face serene, as if she had nothing left to hide, everyone's eyes turned to her in astonishment. The papers, firmly handed to production, weren't empty accusations. They were evidence, facts, contracts, transfers, messages, and at the center of it all, a lawsuit already. Filed, with all the details he thought would never come to light. The silence was broken by the first reactions. Tension gripped the studio. The host, caught off guard, didn't know whether to end the show or keep the cameras rolling. And the man who believed he controlled the narrative was, before everyone's eyes, dismantled piece by piece. But the question that echoed in the back of everyone's mind was inevitable. Why would someone so powerful choose to humiliate someone who knew all his secrets? If this twist surprised you, subscribe to the channel and leave a like so you don't miss the next stories that reveal truths where you least expect them. The beginning of the silent transformation in the couple's life didn't come with outbursts or open arguments, but with small changes in Han Ji-hoon's behavior. At first, it was just a detail. Meetings that stretched later, dinners cancelled at the last minute, business trips that multiplied. Yoona, faithful in her hope, believed it was just the weight of responsibility, but something deep inside her began to suspect there was more behind that increasingly distant gaze. And then it came about Kang So-ra, the young secretary hired by the company in the midst of an international expansion process. Intelligent, always impeccably dressed, So-ra knew her way around the corporate environment. With a calculated smile and a demeanor of apparent innocence, she quickly gained Ji-hoon's trust. To the employees, she was just another cog in the machine, but her lingering glances and hushed conversations began to stir rumors in the glass corridors of the skyscraper where the company's headquarters were located. Yoona noticed her secretary's presence in small details. During a gala dinner, she noticed So-ra standing too close to Ji-hoon, as if orbiting him. On another occasion, she found her perfume lingering on his jacket. Confronted by this silent evidence, Yoona tried to rationalize. She told herself it was just coincidence, that Ji-hoon would never jeopardize everything they had built, but deep down, a shadow of unease began to occupy the space that had once been filled with trust. Meanwhile, Ji-hoon was changing. The man who had previously cared, albeit in a controlled way, about the image of their marriage, began treating her coldly even at home. He would arrive late, turn off his cell phone when he was with business friends, and when she dared to ask him, he would respond with impatience and contempt. Home, which should have been a refuge, became a field of silence and solitude. Yoona, accustomed to swallowing her pain, felt something breaking with each passing day. The rumors, however, weren't confined to the company walls. Seoul's high society, attentive to every move of public figures, began to comment on the suspicious closeness between the CEO and his secretary. At formal receptions, Yoona began to feel the sidelong glances of the other wives, the hushed whispers in the hallways, and the mischievous smiles. She, however, maintained her erect posture and serene expression, as if nothing were affecting her, even when inside she felt increasingly isolated. The most painful thing wasn't just the possibility of betrayal, but the transformation of the man she loved into someone unrecognizable. Ji-hoon seemed fueled by a growing arrogance, as if he no longer needed to disguise anything. He looked at Yoona as if she were a burden, a decorative piece on a board where he believed he had absolute control. This silent contempt was crueler than any offensive words, and so the seemingly solid life began to silently crack, setting the stage for a spectacle far greater than Yoona could have imagined. Kang So-ra's presence was not just an annoying detail, but the spark that would ignite everything to come. And it was amid this suffocating atmosphere of distrust and arrogance that the inevitable happened. In front of thousands of people, the masks fell brutally, and what should have been just another prestigious event turned into the stage for the cruelest humiliation. The auditorium in Seoul was packed that night. International investors, journalists, Korean high society figures, and even government officials had attended the company's gala. Han Tech, a carefully crafted spectacle of power to reaffirm Ji-hoon's image as the most influential man in the tech industry. Lights reflected off glass walls, cameras broadcast every detail in real time, and everyone eagerly awaited the CEO's announcement. Beside him, silently, stood Seo Yoona, maintaining his usual impeccable posture, although in his heart, a dark premonition weighed like never before. Ji-hoon took the stage with the confidence of a king about to deliver a historic speech. His voice echoed firmly throughout the hall, and the initial applause reinforced the aura of grandeur surrounding him. But something in his gaze betrayed a different intention than everyone expected. He wasn't just talking about technology or profits. There was a hidden tension, a cruel desire to prove a point no one yet understood. As he gripped the microphone tighter and looked directly at Yoona, murmurs began to spread among the guests like an invisible electrical current about to explode. And then, the scene that would change everything happened. Ji-hoon ordered the giant screens in the auditorium to be turned on, and suddenly, private messages began to appear, supposedly sent by Yoona to another man. He displayed them in front of everyone, saying in a voice thick with contempt that he had been betrayed by his own wife. The silence that followed was suffocating. The stunned audience couldn't believe their eyes. The broadcast cameras captured a close-up of Yoona's face, which remained motionless, her eyes wide with shock. Ji-hoon didn't stop there. Fueled by his own arrogance, he accused Yoona of being a fraud, of taking advantage of the family name, of tarnishing his reputation with behavior unbecoming of a wife. Each word sounded like a blade slicing through the air, not just to her, but to everyone witnessing the scene. Some guests lowered their heads in discomfort, others exchanged knowing glances, but no one dared intervene. It was like watching a cruel show in which only Ji-hoon had the voice. Yoona tried to breathe deeply, but the weight of shame seemed to crush her. There was no room for defense, no escape. Cameras recorded every second, and millions of people watched from their homes. Her dignity was being torn apart in front of all of Korea. Inside her, a whirlwind of emotions consumed her. Pain, disbelief, humiliation, and a bitter sense of betrayal that went beyond the accusation itself. It was the realization that the man she loved and to whom she had dedicated her life no longer had limits to his cruelty. Behind the scenes, however, some journalists began to question the veracity of the messages. The screenshots appeared poorly edited, the timestamps contradictory. Still, given Ji-hoon's power and theatrics, no one dared to raise doubts at that moment. The weight of the CEO's words still outweighed any evidence of manipulation. With every sentence, Ji-hoon seemed to feed off his wife's humiliation. He approached her, still on stage, and declared before everyone that he would no longer share his life with a woman who shamed his name. When he finished, he dropped the microphone onto the table in a gesture of calculated contempt. The metallic sound reverberated through the auditorium like a final blow. Yuna remained seated, her body rigid, her face pale. She wanted to disappear, wanted the earth to open beneath her feet. But behind that almost unbearable silence, something began to shift. The tears that refused to fall gave way to a silent strength, an inner whisper that told her this would not be the end. Ji-hoon believed he had won, but unknowingly he was planting the seed of his own downfall in front of everyone. The audience, torn between shock and embarrassment, began to applaud timidly, unsure whether to support or protest. Ji-hoon smiled, convinced of his victory. However, in Yuna's heart, a new chapter was beginning to be written, one that would turn the stage of humiliation into the very stage of redemption. That night, Yuna left the auditorium broken but not defeated. And while everyone believed she would disappear in shame, no one imagined the strength that would be born from her silence. A strength capable of changing everyone's destiny. That night, after the auditorium lights dimmed and the awkward applause died down, Seo Yunashi left through the side doors with shaky steps. The noise of the cameras, the incessant flashes, and the whispering voices behind her still echoed in her mind like a relentless hammer. With each photographer's click, it was as if her dignity were being torn apart once more. Once home, in the silence of a luxurious apartment that suddenly seemed cold and unwelcoming, she broke down. She sat on the living room floor, still wearing her elegant dress, and let the tears finally flow uncontrollably. It was as if everything inside her had shattered at once. The image she had painstakingly built, the years of silent dedication, the trust she still felt for her husband despite everything, nothing remained. There was only a suffocating emptiness, accompanied by a pain so intense it felt physical, as if each heartbeat were a cruel reminder of the public humiliation he had suffered. Yuna curled up on the carpet, hugging herself, seeking in her own body the solace no one else could offer. In the following days, the wound didn't heal. On the contrary, it seemed to deepen with each news story published by the press. Social media was unforgiving. Cruel comments spread like wildfire, some ridiculing her, others judging her without knowing the truth. Journalists parked in front of the building, ready to capture any sign of her, and every time she turned on the television, she saw her name linked to scandal and shame. Yuna began to avoid the mirror, unable to face the reflection of someone who, according to the world, deserved no respect. Loneliness also weighed heavily. Close friends disappeared, afraid of being associated with the scandal. Even family members, pressured by public opinion, silently withdrew. It was as if everyone had decided to abandon her at the moment she needed them most. And so, Yuna found herself completely alone, surrounded by cold walls and painful memories. At night, she lay in bed, but sleep wouldn't come. She relived every word Ji-hoon spoke, every look from the audience, every timid applause that sealed her humiliation. However, amidst this abyss of pain, something unexpected began to form. It was a barely perceptible glimmer, but it grew with each tear shed. Yuna realized she couldn't allow this to be the last page of her story. She wouldn't accept her identity being reduced to the scandal wrought by the man who swore to protect her. Still fragile, still in pieces, she began to glimpse the possibility of rising. It was one night, standing in front of the window overlooking the lights of Seoul, that Yuna felt this breath of determination. Her heart was still bleeding, but along with the pain was born the certainty that she needed to shut herself out from the world and act in silence. It wouldn't be through shouting, but through firm, strategic steps that she would find her redemption. And it was in this, in profound silence, where everyone believed she had disappeared in shame, that Yuna began to plot an unexpected path. And every movement hidden in the shadows would become part of a plan no one could have imagined. Just when the world believed Seo Yuna had retreated forever into the shadow of shame, she deliberately disappeared from the spotlight. She gave no interviews, responded to the accusations, and published no open letters. Her silence was interpreted as defeat, but in reality, it was the foundation of a new beginning. While the tabloids plastered her face with cruel headlines, Yuna walked discreetly through the streets of Seoul, dressed simply and wearing sunglasses, blending in with the anonymous crowd who would never have guessed that this woman was the protagonist of the year's biggest scandal. It was during this period of invisibility that she sought help from Young Min-ho, a renowned lawyer known for both his strategic coolness and his unwavering integrity. Their first meeting took place in a small coffee shop in the Mapo-gu neighborhood, away from the cameras and prying eyes. Min-ho listened quietly, without interrupting, as she recounted every detail of her public humiliation and her life with Ji-hoon. When she finished, tears welling in her eyes, Yuna expected to find compassion, but instead received something even more valuable: a plan. Min-ho knew that confronting a man like Han Ji-hoon would require more than emotional accusations. It was necessary to build a solid, irrefutable case that would not only reveal the truth, but also destroy him on the very stage where he had exposed it. In the following weeks, Yuna dedicated herself to gathering evidence, combing through documents, investigating suspicious contracts, and piecing together pieces that revealed a hidden side of Hantech: bid rigging, bribery of politicians, embezzlement of millions, and of course, the illicit relationship with Kang So-ra. The process wasn't easy. With each new document discovered, Yuna relived the painful memories of her life with Ji-hoon. Each forged signature, each hidden receipt, was another emotional scar. But it also fueled her to move forward. She knew it wasn't just about clearing her own name, but about showing the world that the truth, when revealed, could be more powerful than any lie. During this time, Yuna rebuilt not only her strategy, but also her very identity. Away from the cameras, she began practicing yoga, resumed the studies she had, abandoned because of her marriage, and rediscovered the inner strength that had always been hidden beneath layers of silence. Little by little, the humiliated woman gave way to someone stronger, more self-aware, and determined to face the enemy she once called her husband. Meanwhile, Ji-hoon continued his spectacle of arrogance. He gave interviews where he laughed at his ex-wife's weakness, appeared alongside So-ra at social events, and boasted about having freed himself from a burden. But, without realizing it, he was slowly being drawn into a web that Yuna and Min-ho wove with surgical patience. Every contract he signed was scrutinized, every bank transaction tracked, every public appearance recorded as evidence of abusive behavior. Her silence began to bother Ji-hoon. He expected scandals, public tears, desperate declarations. The fact that Yuna didn't react made him uneasy, as if he sensed something was brewing in the shadows. But his arrogance was so great that he quickly dismissed this possibility, convinced she wouldn't have the courage or strength to face him. And so, the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Yuna's patience was sustained by the memory of every tear shed, every night she'd felt alone. Now, each step was meticulously calculated, so that when the moment arrived, there would be no turning back. It was on a rainy night, as she gazed out the window of the small apartment where she had come to live, that Yuna smiled for the first time in a long time. The sound of the rain seemed to herald what was to come. Not an immediate triumphant return, but the certainty that her story would not end in shame. Her silence was merely the prelude to something greater, something that would forever change Ji-hoon's destiny. And while she gathered strength in the shadows, on the other side, Ji-hoon, blinded by his own arrogance, began to feel the first signs that his crown of power was about to crumble. And this fall would not happen in secret, but in front of everyone. While Yoona grew stronger in silence, Han Ji-hoon continued to parade his arrogance as if he were invincible. In every interview, he repeated that the scandal hadn't affected his life, that the company was stronger than ever, and that his new phase alongside Kang So-ra was proof he'd made the right decision. To those unfamiliar with the inside story, he still seemed like the Iron Man of the corporate elite. But a closer look revealed that cracks were beginning to appear. The first sign came from foreign investors. Discreet rumors of possible irregularities began circulating in financial forums in Hong Kong and Singapore. Small movements of distrust turned into sharp drops in the value of the company's shares. Han Ji-hoon, irritated, blamed the market, politics, and even the press, but never considered that the problem lay in his own choices. With each interview in which he appeared laughing and boasting, doubt grew among shareholders, who gradually began to withdraw their support. Within the company, the climate was also changing. Employees who had previously feared him began to whisper about his behavior, recalling episodes in which he treated everyone with contempt. Yoona's name was being discussed in the hallways, and the cruel way she had been exposed began to make even the most loyal employees uncomfortable. What had once been admired as strength now felt like tyranny. Ji-hoon, however, didn't realize it. He spent nights at lavish parties with So-ra, hastily closing deals to show he still had control. But the harder he tried to maintain his facade, the more evident the fragility behind the mask became. In some meetings with large conglomerates, his confident demeanor gave way to impatience and outbursts of anger, frightening investors who preferred to back out discreetly before the ship sank. Meanwhile, Yoona and Min-ho continued to fuel this silent collapse. Each piece of evidence gathered was carefully delivered to the authorities at the right time, ensuring that the pressure on Ji-hoon increased gradually, like a poison spreading unnoticed. Reports began to appear in investigative newspapers, questioning Han-Tech's multi-million-dollar government contracts. At first, they were small stories, but soon they took up entire headlines. And it was at this moment that Ji-hoon's arrogance reached its peak. Instead of seeking a solid defense, he chose to double down. At a press conference, he mocked the investigations, calling them unimportant rumors and mocking the journalists who dared question him. His smile on camera was that of someone who believed he still had everything under control, but the images of his forced laughter were interpreted by the public as disguised desperation. The man who had always been a symbol of confidence now appeared nervous, unstable, on the verge of losing his balance. Inside the house, the atmosphere was no different. Kang So-ra, who initially seemed like the perfect partner, began to show her true colors. Jealous, controlling, and obsessed with power, she began to manipulate Ji-hoon in important decisions, pushing him further into the abyss. Small frictions turned into intense arguments, and the couple's luxurious life began to unravel amidst arguments and mutual accusations. What had seemed like a triumphant relationship was now just another chain dragging him down. What Ji-hoon didn't know was that this entire scenario wasn't just the result of fate or poor choices, but of a precise strategy orchestrated by Yoona. Every drop in the stock market, every rumor fueled by the press, every well-timed denunciation was part of a plan crafted with patience and intelligence. And the cruel beauty of this turn of events lay in the fact that he himself had opened the door to his destruction by exposing his wife in front of everyone. But if Ji-hoon believed his downfall would be just a turbulent phase, he was mistaken. Fate still had in store for him an encounter that would change everything. a reunion in front of the cameras that would show the world that the truth cannot be silenced. The day of Han-tek's grand event dawned with clear skies, but the tension in the air was thick, like a storm about to explode. Ji-hoon, despite the rumors eroding his reputation, was preparing for a night of grand performance. The auditorium in Gangnam was packed with distinguished guests, journalists from across the country, and investors seeking answers. He believed that taking the stage once again would regain the audience's trust, displaying his usual confident demeanor, as if the world were still beneath his feet. The cameras captured every detail: the red carpet, the incessant flashes, Ji-hoon's triumphant entrance alongside Kang So-ra. Many smiled for the cameras, but behind the scenes there was talk of investigations, stock instability, and the CEO's increasingly erratic behavior. No one, however, expected what was about to happen. When Ji-hoon began his speech, extolling achievements, promising expansion, and mocking supposed enemies, he believed he was regaining his luster. But a discreet movement at the side of the auditorium began to draw attention. The doors opened and Seo Yoona entered, dressed in sober elegance, accompanied by Young Min-ho, the lawyer carrying a dossier filled with irrefutable evidence. A murmur rippled through the auditorium. Journalists rose and cameras turned. For the first time, Ji-hoon lost control of his expression. The silence that followed was almost sacred. Yoona walked to the front of the stage, her steps firm, exuding dignity and determination. Min-ho displayed falsified contracts, bank statements of illegal transfers, and recordings exposing the illicit relationship with Kang So-ra, revealing the setup that had harmed her. The shock was absolute. Ji-hoon tried to react, laughing nervously, but his voice no longer held authority. Each piece of evidence crumbled his mask of confidence. The auditorium erupted in murmurs and applause as journalists broadcast the moment live to millions of viewers. So-ra tried to hide her face, but the flashbulbs were unforgiving. Yoona remained silent, her expression serene amidst the chaos, demonstrating that the most devastating revenge requires no words, only the right moment and the truth revealed. The event planned to exalt the CEO's power turned into a public tribunal of his downfall. Ji-hoon, once the swaying eye of all, was now an exposed man, cowering before a truth that could no longer be erased. And while that reunion had already been the biggest turning point, what came next promised to be even more devastating, as Ji-hoon would make his last desperate attempt to reclaim what he could never restore. As the event came to an end, and the press was already preparing to turn that night into unforgettable headlines, Han Ji-hoon felt the weight of ruin fall on his shoulders. The man who had dominated audiences with his oratory now walked backstage like a fugitive, trying to compose himself amidst the chaos. Seeing Seo Yoona close without the barrier of cameras, the mask of arrogance finally fell away. What had once been pride now turned into despair. He approached her with hurried steps, his breathing ragged, and for the first time in years, his tone carried not orders, but pleas. Yoona, we need to talk. You need to listen to me. Those words, so fragile, sounded almost unreal, coming from a man who had accused her on national television, stripped her of all dignity in front of millions. Yoona stood straight. Her gaze was steady, distant, and there was no trace of emotion that might indicate any openness. She listened silently as Ji-hoon hurriedly ranted, trying to convince her that it had all been a misunderstanding, that he had been manipulated, that they could still start over. I made a mistake, but we can rebuild. You have always been my strength, he said, as if those words could erase the scars left by his cruelty. But Yoona was no longer the same. The gulf between them had become unbridgeable. She remembered every night she cried alone, every cold look, every word of contempt, and most of all, the public humiliation he'd made a spectacle of. The man before her wasn't genuinely repentant, but someone cornered, desperately trying to save his own skin. In a calm but firm voice, Yuna replied, "The words you're saying now should have been spoken when there was still something to save. Today, they're nothing but empty echoes." Ji-hoon, stunned, tried to grab her arm, but she pulled away gracefully, as if breaking free from an invisible chain. In that moment, it was clear to everyone around that there was no turning back. The public might forgive mistakes, but they wouldn't forgive arrogance followed by lies. And Yuna, with her silent refusal, sealed before everyone that his power no longer reached her life. But if Ji-hoon believed the pain ended there, he hadn't seen anything yet. What would come next wouldn't just be a refusal, but the cruelest form of justice, a final downfall before the eyes of all Korea. The day after the event, Korea awoke in shock. Headlines featured Ji-hoon, the once proud man, being confronted on national television by the irrefutable evidence presented by Yuna and lawyer Jung Min-ho. The recordings circulated on televisions, cell phones, and online forums. The CEO, a symbol of success, became the target of memes, jokes, and public outrage. At Hantek's offices, the atmosphere became unbearable. Employees avoided mentioning their boss's name, shareholders met to discuss his departure. Trust evaporated in a matter of hours, and the empire Ji-hoon had spent years building began to crumble. The company he had proudly boasted was being eroded by the truth revealed in front of millions. Meanwhile, Yuna remained serene. She didn't seek the spotlight. She didn't make inflammatory speeches. She didn't show anger. Her revenge was silent and elegant as always. Min-ho, by her side, guided each step of the process with surgical precision. In court, he presented falsified contracts, secret account statements, testimonies from coerced employees, and compromising messages exchanged between Ji-hoon and Sora. Each document inflicted wounds on his pride. Each piece of evidence irrevocably exposed the truth. Ji-hoon appeared at the first hearing with an impeccable countenance, a sharp suit, trying to convey control over the narrative. But his voice trembled. He stumbled over his arguments, and his veneer of confidence crumbled with each piece of evidence Min-ho presented. The audience was not made up of subordinates, but of citizens and journalists eager to document the downfall of the giant. The most devastating blow came when Yuna testified. Silently, firmly, and clearly, she recounted how she had been manipulated and humiliated. Each word carried years of silenced pain, but also dignity. At the end, she looked at Ji-hoon. "Justice doesn't return what I lost, but it returns the truth, and that's what the world needed to hear." The cameras captured the complete breakdown of his face. For the first time, there was no shield, no allies, no power, just a man naked before the truth. Kang Sora disappeared from public appearances, abandoning him at the most critical moment. The verdict of public opinion was relentless. The streets were buzzing, young people shared excerpts from the hearing, and international newspapers reported the arrogant CEO's downfall. And in this scenario of destruction, Yuna emerged stronger, not with screams, but as a symbol of resilience. Her revenge didn't translate into humiliation, but rather into silently watching the downfall of the one who had exposed her. When Min-ho delivered the order removing Ji-hoon from the presidency of Hantek, the document signed in front of everyone cemented her victory. The stage used to expose her became the very stage of her downfall. The cold. Revenge was complete, silent, precise, and devastating. The penthouse apartment that had once been the scene of lavish parties and champagne-soaked gatherings was now plunged into a deathly silence. Curtains drawn, empty bottles scattered across the floor, crumpled papers piled on the table. It was in this decadent setting that Han Ji-hoon passed the days. The man who had dominated the market with firm speeches could now barely hold his own reflection in the mirror. The television was constantly showing his downfall. Debate shows analyzed every detail of the trial. Journalists described his past arrogance as a manual for self-destruction. And even young people on social media turned him into an example of the price of arrogance. Ji-hoon, sitting on the couch, watched as if he were a spectator of his own tragedy. He tried to turn off the TV, but always turned it back on, as if he needed to suffer through it all over again with each rerun, as if to confirm that this wasn't just a nightmare. The weight of loneliness also consumed him. Kang So-ra had disappeared, abandoning him when she realized the glow had faded. Friends who once vied for his attention now avoided even answering his calls. The phone, which had previously rang non-stop with invitations and opportunities, remained silent. Ji-hoon wandered the rooms in silence, surrounded by memories of a life that had slipped through his fingers. At times, he tried to convince himself there was still a way out, but soon, regret overwhelmed him. He remembered the night he exposed Yoona in front of everyone, the sound of the microphone hitting the table, her silent gaze, the stunned audience. The more he thought, the more he realized that that was the moment he destroyed not only his marriage, but himself as well. It wasn't Yoona who had defeated him, but his own arrogance that blinded him. He walked around the room like a ghost, holding a half-empty glass of wine, and with each step, he remembered how she accompanied him to events, how she smiled discreetly to soften his coldness. Now only emptiness remained. He tried to find solace in happy memories, but even they became painful. Her face appeared in his mind not as a sweet memory, but as a silent judgment that followed him around every corner. In that solitude, Ji-hoon understood the cruel irony of fate. The man who had been applauded by crowds was now alone, and the silence surrounding him was more deafening than any booing. For the first time, he admitted to himself that he had lost everything: love, respect, company, and even the right to look into the eyes of those who had once admired him. But fate still had one last act in store, not for him, but for Yoona. For while Ji-hoon sank into regret, she rose to a new life, ready to show the world that truth always blossoms, even after the darkest nights. Time passed, and the image of Seo Yoona rose like a phoenix from the ashes. After all the suffering, after the tears and humiliation that crushed her on national television, she finally found the strength that had always been within her, but which needed pain to manifest in its purest form. Today, far from the chains of the past, Yoona walks lightly through the streets of Seoul. She is no longer seen as the woman who was exposed, but as the woman who dared to transform shame into dignity, silence into voice, and weakness into power. Korean society, which once judged her with prejudiced eyes, now views her with admiration. At conferences, interviews, and social gatherings, she is remembered not as the wife of a tycoon, but as the woman who refused to allow her identity to be defined by the cruelty of others. Yoona turned her story into inspiration, dedicating herself to helping other women break free from abusive relationships and find strength amidst the darkness. Her name, once associated with scandal, was now synonymous with resilience and hope. In every speech she gave, Yoona didn't seek to attack Ji-hoon, but rather to teach him that true victory lies not in destroying others, but in rebuilding oneself despite them. Her eyes conveyed a serenity that contrasted with the storm she'd experienced. The past still existed, but it no longer imprisoned her. It served only as a testament to her ability to survive and flourish. This transformation was her quietest revenge, yet at the same time, her most devastating. While Yuna flourished, Ji-hoon faded. The man once hailed as a business genius had become a forgotten ghost, a name that served only as an example in the news about the price of arrogance. Abandoned by everyone, he sank into bitter memories, unable to reverse what his own pride had destroyed. The irony was cruel. The stage he had chosen to expose his wife was the same stage that marked the beginning of his downfall. And one calm afternoon, walking along the banks of the Han River, Yuna stopped to watch the calm waters reflect the city lights. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let the gentle wind touch her face. For the first time in a long time, she smiled, not as if hiding a wound, but as if she had finally found peace. Her last words, spoken softly as a whisper to herself, summed up her entire journey. There is no greater justice than seeing the truth revealed before everyone. Because where there is truth, there is no room for lies to survive. And with that, Yuna moved on, leaving behind not only Ji-hoon, but the version of herself that no longer existed. The future, once clouded by grief, now opened before her, like a horizon illuminated by new possibilities. The weeks following the trial marked a new phase in the life of Seo Yuna freed. From the chains of her past, she began to walk the streets of Seoul, not as someone in need of hiding, but as a woman who had finally reclaimed her identity. Her image was no longer that of a wife cruelly exposed by an arrogant man, but that of a survivor who knew how to transform her pain into fuel for a transformation that echoed far beyond herself. Her proud gaze, her firm steps, and the serenity she now carried showed everyone that true strength lies not in taking revenge with hatred, but in rising above what once tried to destroy her. Soon, Yuna became an inspiration. She participated in meetings, lectures, and initiatives aimed at women who, like her, had been silenced and judged. Her words were always measured, full of restrained emotion, yet capable of penetrating deep into the hearts of those who listened. She spoke not to show off, but to remind everyone that no one needs to remain trapped in a painful story. Alongside Young Min-ho, who remained as her support and faithful partner, she dedicated herself to rebuilding not only her own life, but also that of so many others who needed to believe that starting over was possible. Meanwhile, the figure of Han Ji-hoon faded more and more. The headlines no longer depicted his face with the same brilliance as before, but with the weight of ruin. His name was cited only as an example of arrogance that led to downfall, a constant reminder that every empire built on lies inevitably crumbles. The man once lauded as a business genius had now become nothing more than a forgotten shadow, a living warning to those who believe that power can crush truth. Yuna, for her part, found peace in small gestures. One afternoon, walking along the banks of the Han River, she stopped to observe the reflection of the city lights in the calm waters. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes and smiled, not as if hiding wounds, but as if she had finally learned to live fully. In her mind, the painful memories no longer weighed down like chains, but remained as scars that bore witness to her journey. She had survived, she had resisted, and above all, she had overcome. His last words, spoken in a firm and meaningful tone, summed up his journey. There is no lie that lasts forever. The truth always finds a way to reveal itself, and when it does, no amount of arrogance can silence it. And so the story ends with Yuna walking toward a bright future, while Ji-hoon disappears into the shadows of his own regret. A woman who was humiliated before everyone now became eternal in her dignity, reminding everyone that justice, when it arrives, may be silent, but it never ceases to be relentless. If this story touched you, don't forget to leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to the channel. Here, each story is a reminder that the truth can hurt, but it always sets you free, and the next one we tell will move you even more.